I did not flinch, I did not raise my voice. Exactly 1 year after my divorce was finalized, I ran into my ex-husband at Toronto General. He stood in the middle of the hallway with my former sister-in-law beside him, a baby boy balanced on her hip, and he told me leaving me was the smartest thing he'd ever done because a woman who can't carry a child isn't really a wife at all. I didn't cry. I checked my watch, smiled, and told him to enjoy the next 2 minutes. When the elevator doors opened behind him, my former sister-in-law dropped the bottle she was holding and it shattered on the tile. Before that morning, I would have told you I had my life under control. I'm 34. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in downtown Toronto, the kind of job where people's eyes glaze over at parties when I explain what I actually do. I trace money. I find the seams in financial statements where things don't add up, the places where a number that should be there simply isn't, and I follow that thread until it leads somewhere ugly. I'd built an entire career on the principle that the truth always shows up in the paper trail eventually, even when people work very hard to bury it. That Tuesday, I wasn't there for work. My younger sister, Hazel, had gone in for day surgery, nothing serious, a gallbladder removal, but I'd taken the morning off to sit with her and drive her home after. I was standing near the nurse's station on the 4th floor with her discharge folder tucked under my arm when I turned and found my path blocked. Owen. My ex-husband, 37 years old, wearing the kind of overcoat that costs more than most people's rent, with that particular look on his face he used to get right before he said something designed to wound. Beside him stood Naomi, Owen's younger sister. My former sister-in-law, who I had loved, genuinely loved, for the better part of a decade. We used to get coffee every Sunday. I was a bridesmaid in a wedding she never actually had, because as it turned out, somewhere in the last 2 years of my marriage, the wedding she was planning was with my husband. On her hip was a baby boy, maybe a year old, dressed in a little knit sweater with anchors on it. I didn't know his name yet. I would, soon enough. "Well, would you look at that?" Owen said, loud enough that 2 nurses at the station turned their heads. "If it isn't my Ice Queen ex-wife. What are you doing in a hospital, Margot? Finally getting that heart of yours looked at." I looked at him evenly. "I'm here for my sister, step aside, Owen." He didn't move. He never could resist an audience, and the hallway was full of one. Visitors, a man in a wheelchair near the window, a nurse pretending not to listen while she charted. Owen had spent our entire marriage performing for rooms like this, and divorce hadn't cured him of it. "You always thought you were better than me," he said, his voice climbing. "Too busy with your spreadsheets to give me an actual family. You made me feel like garbage for 6 years, Margot, and look at me now. Look at what I have. A son. A real future. Leaving you was the best decision of my life, because at least Naomi can give me something you never could." Naomi shifted the baby and gave me a smile that had nothing warm in it. "It's hard for you, I know," she said, with the particular cruelty of someone who used to call herself my best friend. "You spent 10 years chasing after Owen's approval and couldn't even keep him satisfied. Meanwhile, we're building an actual life. He just took his first steps last week." She kissed the top of the baby's head like she was performing it for a camera. "Owen put a deposit down on a place in Oakville, 4 bedrooms. Something you'll never have, because your body couldn't manage what a normal woman's can." People in the hallway were staring openly now. A woman near the vending machine looked at me with something like pity. They were waiting for me to crumble, the way you wait for a glass to fall off a table, that horrible anticipatory stillness. I didn't cry. I have spent my whole career training myself not to react to provocation, because the moment you react, you stop seeing clearly, and I needed to see clearly. So instead, I laughed. Softly, genuinely. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and checked the time, 10:42 in the morning. "Is that right, Owen?" I said. "Best decision of your life?" His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. He wasn't used to me not breaking. "Yes," he snapped, louder now, trying to recover his footing. "You're a bitter, lonely woman, Margot, and you always will be." I took one small step closer, close enough that only he could really hear me. "We'll see if you still feel that way in about 90 seconds, I said. "Because the truth about your perfect little family is about to walk right out of that elevator." He scoffed and glanced over his shoulder at the closed doors, certain I was bluffing, certain I was just a desperate woman trying to save face. He needed to see me break before those doors opened. He stepped closer, dropping his voice to something low and vicious, the tone he used to use behind closed doors where no one else could hear it. "You were always delusional," he hissed. "Standing there checking your watch like you still have any power over me. You have nothing, Margot." I had to pretend for 6 years that it was fine you couldn't get pregnant. I smiled through it. But the truth is, I was disgusted. Why would I waste my best years on a woman whose body couldn't do the one thing it's supposed to do? Naomi rocked the baby and said nothing, just watched, smug, like she'd earned a front row seat to my humiliation. Owen kept going, because that was always his weakness. Once he started bragging, he couldn't stop. You think you were so clever in the divorce, don't you? You think your little accounting tricks got you anything in mediation? You made me swear under oath my income was capped at base salary plus standard bonus. You really thought a senior portfolio manager just declares everything to the CRA like some schmuck? He laughed under his breath. I funneled 6 figures a year through accounts you never thought to look at. I bought a deposit on an Oakville house in cash while you were fighting me over who keeps the good blender. I played you and your lawyer for fools, Margot. There's no paper trail, you have nothing. Something in my chest went very still and very cold, the particular stillness I get at work when a column of numbers stops making sense and then, suddenly, makes too much sense. He thought he was twisting the knife. Instead, he'd just handed me, in front of 2 nurses and a man in a wheelchair, a verbal confession to income concealment and perjury on a sworn financial disclosure. I ran the math instinctively, the way I run math on every file that crosses my desk. A deposit in cash on an Oakville property meant 6 figures of liquid funds he'd sworn, under penalty of perjury before a judge, that he did not have. A senior portfolio manager at a regulated firm doesn't funnel bonus income without leaving footprints somewhere. Through a numbered account, a shell holding, a family trust he thought no one would think to check. He hadn't just lied to me. He'd lied to the court and likely to the Canada Revenue Agency, and if his firm was federally regulated, he'd very possibly violated disclosure obligations that could end his license permanently. I filed every word away. I kept my face perfectly still. You really shouldn't have told me that, Owen, I said quietly. Because that's not a custody argument or a bruised ego, that's fraud. He rolled his eyes, delighted with himself. Go ahead, call your lawyer. Tell her I bragged in a hospital hallway. There's no paper trail, Margot. I covered everything. You lost and I won, and there's nothing you can do about it. He was so pleased with his own cleverness that he didn't hear the elevator chime behind him. The doors slid open just as my 90 seconds ran out. Owen didn't turn around right away, too busy watching my face for the crack he was certain was coming. But the air in the hallway changed before he even saw why. Stepping out of the elevator was my brother-in-law, Desmond. No, not Desmond. I caught myself, the way you catch a slip of the tongue mid-sentence, and the name that actually belonged to him settled into place. Callum, my sister Hazel's husband. 6'3", the build of a man who used to play university football and never quite let it go, wearing a charcoal suit that fit like it had been tailored that morning, which it probably had. Callum was a senior investigator with the Ontario Securities Commission, the kind of man whose presence made compliance officers reach for their phones the second he walked into a building. He wasn't alone. Beside him, moving with the contained fury of a man who'd been lied to by someone he trusted with millions, was a man I didn't recognize yet. Tall, in an immaculate gray overcoat, jaw set so hard I could see the muscle working in his cheek. His eyes went straight past me and landed on the back of Owen's head like a sniper finding a target. There he is, the stranger said, and his voice carried the particular flatness of a man who has stopped being angry and started being efficient. The man who told me my retirement fund was sitting in a diversified, fully disclosed portfolio. Owen spun around so fast he nearly lost his footing. The color drained out of his face in real time, like watching a tide go out. Marcus, Owen said, and the way his voice cracked on that single syllable told me everything. This was a client, a significant one. What are you doing here? This is exactly the place, Callum said, stepping forward and opening the leather folder under his arm with the unhurried calm of a man who has done this 100 times and knows precisely how it ends. Owen Bramfield, I'm with the Ontario Securities Commission. We've been conducting an audit of your firm's managed accounts for the past 11 weeks, triggered by an irregularity flag on a client redemption request. He glanced, briefly, almost politely at me. And about 40 minutes ago, your ex-wife's firm forwarded us a forensic report identifying a pattern of fund diversions running through 3 numbered accounts tied to your name. We were already on our way to your office when your colleague here, a nod toward the man in the gray coat, informed us he'd be waiting at this hospital instead because his wife had just delivered and he wanted to be the one to tell you to your face that he knew. The man in the gray coat, Marcus. Apparently, stepped closer, close enough that Owen actually flinched. $2.3 million, he said. That's what I trusted you with after my father died. You told me it was diversified across 3 funds. You sent me statements every quarter. Every single one of them was fabricated, wasn't it? Owen's mouth opened and nothing came out. Naomi's face had gone the color of paper. She looked down at the baby in her arms like she'd forgotten he was there. And the bottle she'd been holding slipped out of her hand and hit the tile with a crack, loud enough to make the man in the wheelchair flinch. I will admit, watching the bottle hit the floor was the single most satisfying sound I have ever heard in a hospital corridor. "Margot," Owen said, turning to me, and for the first time in our entire relationship I heard something in his voice that wasn't contempt. It was closer to fear. "You did this." "No," I said, and I meant it. "You did this. About 90 seconds ago, in fact, in front of 2 nurses, a man in a wheelchair, and your sister. I just happened to be standing here with very good hearing and an unfortunately excellent memory for numbers. What I didn't say, because there was no need to, was that I'd been building the file on Owen for 9 months before that morning. Not out of vengeance, or not only out of vengeance. After the divorce was finalized, a former client of mine, a woman whose husband had hidden assets in a way that felt eerily familiar, asked me almost offhand whether I'd ever looked closely at my own ex's filings. I told her no. That night I went home and I did. It took one evening to find the first inconsistency: a declared salary that didn't match the lifestyle, a mortgage application with numbers that contradicted his sworn affidavit by a margin too large to be a rounding error. After that, I couldn't stop pulling the thread. I am, after all, very good at my job. I'd spent the past 9 months quietly building a forensic file thick enough that when I finally handed it to a contact at the OSC, they opened a formal investigation within a week. I hadn't known that particular Tuesday that the audit had reached critical mass. I'd simply gone to the hospital for my sister. Some coincidences, I've learned, are really just inevitabilities wearing a disguise. What followed in the weeks after wasn't quiet. Owen's firm suspended him within 48 hours, then terminated him outright once the OSC's findings became public. He was charged under the Securities Act with fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, and separately referred to the Public Prosecution Service for tax evasion, since a 6-figure annual income funneled through a numbered account and never declared to the CRA is, it turns out, a federal matter, not just a regulatory one. His bail was denied after Marcus and 2 other defrauded clients came forward. Turns out Owen's diversified portfolio trick wasn't a one-time slip. It was a pattern going back 4 years, and Marcus's $2.3 million wasn't even the largest sum he'd misappropriated. Naomi lost custody of their son within 3 months. It wasn't only the financial fraud, though that mattered. The court found that the Oakville house deposit had come directly from misappropriated client funds Naomi knew about and had helped move through a joint account in her name. She'd signed paperwork. She'd known. A family court judge doesn't look kindly on a parent who's facilitated fraud while a toddler is in the next room. She avoided criminal charges only by testifying against Owen in exchange for immunity, which meant the woman who used to call herself my best friend spent 2 full days on a witness stand describing, in granular detail, exactly how my marriage had ended. The house in Oak never closed. The deposit was seized as proceeds of crime. Last I heard, and I didn't go looking, Hazel mentioned it in passing, Naomi was renting a 1-bedroom in Mississauga and working at a call center, raising her son alone on weekends because the rest of the time he's with her parents since her schedule doesn't allow for full custody anymore, and Owen, currently serving an 11-year sentence at a federal facility outside Kingston, isn't exactly available to help. I didn't get the satisfaction of watching any of that unfold in person. I got something better. I got my work. The forensic report I'd built on Owen became something of a calling card inside the small, gossipy world of Toronto wealth management compliance. Quietly, because none of this is the kind of thing anyone puts on a business card, but word travels. Within 6 months, I'd left my firm and opened my own practice, specializing in exactly the kind of work that ended my marriage in the first place, tracing hidden assets for women going through high-conflict divorces. The ones whose husbands think a numbered account and a confident smile are enough to outsmart a forensic accountant. I now have a small office on Bay Street with 3 associates and a waitlist that stretches past the new year. Marcus, as it happens, became my first major referral source. Turns out when you recover $2.3 million of a man's inheritance, he tells people about you. I think about that hallway sometimes, the version of myself standing there with a discharge folder under one arm, while a man who used to share my bed told me my body had made me worthless. I think about how certain he was that I would break, how certain Naomi was, rocking that baby on her hip, that she'd won something. What neither of them understood, what I don't think people like that ever understand, is that real power was never about who could humiliate the other person loudest in a public hallway. It was about who was still standing, clear-eyed and steady, when the noise stopped. I didn't need to scream at Owen. I didn't need to claw at Naomi's perfect life. I just needed to keep doing what I already did better than either of them. Pay attention, follow the numbers, and wait. I still go to that hospital sometimes for ordinary things, a checkup, visiting a colleague who'd had a baby of her own. I walk past that same nurse's station on the 4th floor without flinching now. It's just a hallway. It stopped being the place where my marriage ended the day it became, instead, the place where I finally stopped being anyone's punchline. I built something real out of the wreckage they left behind, and I built it with my own 2 hands, my own mind, my own name on the door. That's the only inheritance that matters in the end. Not a house in Oakville, not a child used as a trophy, but the simple, unshakable knowledge that I was never the broken one in that hallway. I never will be.